psychology and sociology, who has delved into the mysteries surrounding the origins of sacred measures and the base 60 mathematical system of the ancient Sumerians and Babylonians. Keith has built upon and expanded the pioneering research of Bruce Cathie, examining the Earth energy grid matrix, and has made critical breakthroughs over the past decade in decoding the physics underlying not only the placement of ancient structures such as the Great Pyramids and Stonehenge, but also modern military intelligent facilities. And we're going to talk more with him about this and so much more. There's so much information that he has that he's going to share with us tonight. So let me dial him up here and get him on the air with us. Keith. Hi.
Hello.
Hi, this is Michael Vera with Late Night in the Midlands. Welcome aboard.
It's good to be here.
It's great to have you here. It's what time is it where you are?
2:30 in the morning.
Oh, well, I thank you so much for staying up with us.
Well, I do have late nights usually, so up 5 in the morning I can just about manage.
Well, great. Well, it's a pleasure to have you here, my friend. I appreciate you taking the time out. I had a listener who contacted me and says that I needed to get you on the show. So I looked into you and I was fascinated, and I had to get you on the show. So you're here tonight. And I guess we could start out with what drove you down this highway of the ancient world mysteries and eventually leading up to your book.
Well, I would have to say it was something that came towards the end of finishing college, 1998. And I almost picked up a copy of Nexus magazine, which deals with all of these kinds of things. It's an Australian publication. And again, it deals with all of the topics, areas that you could say the conspiracy stuff, you know, the suppressed history, science, you know, religion, spirituality. And also, I got into this initially looking at ancient religions and even the Hiram Key by Christopher Knight and Robert Lomas and the whole Gnostic thread of history. But I was really intrigued by measure and angular measure, degrees, minutes, and seconds of arc. I mean, for example, you know, we have 360 degrees to a circle. And these ancient myths, because I've always been interested as well in Greek mythology, and I was a big fan of Clash of the Titans film as well, you know, Zeus and Hera and all of that. Sure. But I delved into this and looked at the works of like Ovid, a Roman poet, and his major work Metamorphoses, and it talks all about the mythologies, and you realize that they're all coded stories for celestial events and you know, major shifts in the planets in the solar system. And so I looked at things like this issue of did the Earth truly once have 360 days per year? Because currently it's about 365.24218, just a touch under 365 and a quarter. And there's this idea, did it really have 360 days? Did it really change to its present? Or is all of that just an approximation? And it feeds into the whole issue of sacred geometry. And I was really intrigued in trying to find out whether or not there was a true universal system of measure, of units of measure, and it tied into these ideal units that we hear about. And when I was looking at the Nexus magazine in particular, they sell lots of books there, and I was very intrigued by a particular researcher called Bruce Cathie, and he wrote several books, and he only died quite recently, I believe, and he's from New Zealand, and he was looking into the whole thing of angular measure, degrees, minutes, and seconds of arc. And one of the really incredible things he found was in studying UFO reports, he found that when he plotted the sightings of them and their movements, they appeared to align in a kind of basic north, south, east, west grid matrix over the Earth. This was around the area of New Zealand, which seemed to be of splitting up into minute of arc angles. He found sections of 30 minute of arc angles, and they could be split up further into 7.5 intervals. And he was looking at the whole issue here of something real. In other words, rather than just simply think that these units are abstract angular measures, he's basically saying, hey, we can tie these into energetic intervals over the Earth, and that somehow the UFOs are using this. So it makes it all the more real. And it was going in this direction that I decided to do a major study of the Earth, the Moon, the Sun, to see if there was any truth to a once harmonious solar system. I mean, for example, the ancient Egyptians, they had a calendar of precisely 360 days per year, with a moon month of 30 days, right? And they added on 5 unlucky days, as they call it, onto the end, yes? And they had a mythological story to explain this. And I'll just relate the story, because it's quite interesting. Okay. In brief, the solar deity, Ra, had heard this prophecy that the sky goddess, Nut, would give birth to some children, and that a child of Nut would depose him. So he cast a curse on Nut that she could not give birth on any day of the year. And there were 360 days per year, right? And so Nut has this lover called Geb, which is the Earth. Nut's the sky, Geb's the Earth. And Nut goes towards, she contacts to get out of this curse that Ree's put on her. She goes to the wisdom god, Tota, and he goes to the moon god, Chonsu, and they play a game of drafts, right, with the moon. And the moon, the stakes are that if the moon loses, it will lose some of its light. And the moon does in fact lose some of its light and becomes weakened in the sky and smaller. And it loses 1/72nd part. And as a result, this adds, by the moon shifting, becoming smaller in the sky, it loses its light and now becomes a mere reflector of light only. This story initially says that the moon is a brilliant emitter of light, but it now periodically has to go into hiding, and can only shine a bright full moon every once in a while, This is like the phases of the moon explained. Mm-hmm. But as a result of this effect on the moon, 5 extra days are added to the Earth year. So we have 365 days. And each of these new days is a new god born. And as a result, this deposes the Ra from his place. But as a story, though, you've got to ask yourself, is there a physical reality to this? And I looked at what we knew about celestial mechanics, and for most people out there who've looked at the basics of the solar system, they'll be familiar with a special law developed or discovered by Johannes Kepler. And this was he lived in the late 16th, early 17th century. And this law basically relates the time taken for a planet to orbit the sun to its distance from the sun. And this particular law basically relates a change to the orbital period to a change to the distance from the sun using a combination of powers. And I'll just give you a basic example for your listeners. Okay. Let's say you've got the planet Mars, right? Now, it's got about 687 days to orbit the sun, yeah? The Earth's about 365. So if you divide Mars by the Earth's orbital period, you'll get a value of 1.88 or so on your calculator, yeah? Well, if you look at the distance of Mars from the sun, and you divide that by the distance of the Earth, yeah, you get a ratio of 1.523. And what he found was that if you cube the ratio of change of the distance, that is, you just multiply it by itself, so 3 times. So it's 1.523 times 1.523 times 1.523, yeah? That there will equal the orbital period ratio squared, multiplied by itself twice. And you could do that. I realise it's a bit tricky relating that, to people over there,
especially to me,
radio,
because I'm mathematically prehistoric.
It's a bit of a subtle one, but it's just basically relating. You're connecting up a change to the time taken for a planet to go around the sun to a change to its mean distance from the sun. Yeah, the Earth's about 93 million miles from the sun. Yeah, if you were to move the Earth to where Mars is, it would have to have the same distance from the sun as Mars does. So all I found was, in a nutshell, is that just as Kepler's law relates the orbital period of a planet to its distance from the sun, I found that there are other laws of exactly the same type which link the moon month, the size of the Earth, and so forth. I found that there were laws just like Kepler's, but using different combinations of powers. And without going too much into the mathematics, I'll actually give you an indication of the things I was looking at, because just from a viewpoint. If you were to take the mean distance between the Earth and the moon, yeah, you'll find that that distance is almost dead on 60 times the radius of the Earth, but it's not quite. It's 60.29. If you were to look at again a basic one, under the Egyptian calendar, there are exactly 12 months to 1 year, but currently they're about 12.36. If you look at the radius of the sun, and then again you look at how many times that fits into the distance between the Earth and the sun, it's not quite 216. And remember, we start out with degrees, minutes, and seconds of arc. Degrees is 360. Then we multiply that by 60, 21,600, yeah, begins 216. Multiply that by 60 for seconds of arc, yeah, so you go from degrees, minutes, and seconds, and it's 1,296,000. All of these units, then, you'll find mathematically that there are relations between these, and our solar system seems to be tied into this primary set with variations. Everything is just slightly out of harmony, though, and using these laws, I was able to demonstrate how you could very, very precisely back transform the current solar system. I looked at all the planets, not just the sun and the moon. Well, I would say the sun, although that's not got an orbital period, I showed that its physical expansion is tied into these laws too. And I revealed that very decisively that there seems to be clear confirmation that our solar system as a whole was once in an amazing state of harmony, but that through some dynamic change to our solar system, and maybe even a universal level, right, all of the values have been transformed from this basic harmony to its more complex state. But what I ultimately took from this, where it got even more intriguing, was that I could demonstrate that our units of measures, the primary imperial measures we use, feet, inches, fathoms, I could demonstrate that these units of measure, there was an ideal set, and it is in fact based upon what are currently today feet, like in Britain or in the United States, what is right now today regarded as a foot unit, 6,000 feet, that is the primary unit for what is a 1 minute of arc sweep on the equator of the Earth in its ideal sense. There was a great proof of that. You see, if you simply take the equatorial circumference of the Earth at present, right, and you express it in units of 6,000 feet, right, the value is about 21,914 such feet, If you simply just divide that by the ratio of change for the Earth's orbital period from 360 days to its present, 365.24218. Right? If you take that ratio there, and it'll be 1.01456, yeah? If you divide the current circumference of the Earth by that, you get 21,600. It back transforms to these wonderful harmonious values. And the upshot of all this, and I hope to end the mathematics here, the upshot of all this is that I found that once I'd validated the ideal set, could demonstrate this, I then started to look at ancient megalithic monuments, and I looked at the placement of such structures as Stonehenge, the Great Pyramid, and even some of the other things like the Pyramid of Mars. And I found that you could absolutely validate the location of these because they were chosen to be placed where they were based upon special latitudes, and they wanted to attain certain ratios. And even the sizes of these structures were tied in to the size of the planets. They were a harmonious fit.
Well, now, if I could interrupt for just a second, you said the pyramids of Mars. So is that to say that you know that there are pyramids? I've seen pictures, and I believe there is. But
yeah, have you seen the five-sided one, the so-called D&M pyramid?
I have. I've got a good friend who studies this stuff on Mars, and he sends me fascinating pictures all the time of this stuff.
Well, I'll tell you what I'll do then. I'll tell you about the Great Pyramid on Earth, and then Stonehenge, and then I'll tell you how that ties into the Pyramid on Mars. And there's a connection here, which it's in my book, but I've very rarely said this on radio, but it's an amazing connection. And it's one of those things which really validates the location of it. The reason I was at least banging on earlier about how the Earth changed from 360 days to the present value, very accurately. I'll just give you the numeric sequence of that ratio, right? It's 1.01456 as the beginning, yes? That's what you get if you divide 365.24218 by 360. The ratio there. That ratio multiplied by 10 determined exactly the latitude that the Great Pyramid was on. And this is why you can absolutely confirm that the builders knew the dimensions of the Earth to extreme accuracy, right? They knew it was an ellipsoid form. You see, the Earth's not a perfect sphere. It's a slightly squashed sphere. And it's an elliptical shape if you look at it side on. The curvature is elliptical. So this is a complex level of mathematics here, right? Now, the latitude of the Great Pyramid is 29 degrees, 58 minutes, and 51 seconds of arc north. And if you use our very accurate ellipsoid model that we use today, it's the World Geodetic, which is WGS, World Geodetic System 84 model, right, developed in 1984. If you plug in that latitude and you work out the small circle circumference, right, at that latitude, which is parallel to the equator, if you work that out and divide it by the elliptical arc from the equator to the latitude, you will get 10 times the ratio of change for the Earth's tropical year. In other words, instead of it being 1.01456, it'll be 10.1456. And the error rate there is practically non-existent. Just to give you an indication, there are about 131 million feet, right, to the circumference of the Earth elliptically, yeah? If you were to shift the Great Pyramid a mere 50 feet to the north, you would get perfection in that ratio, right, to 10 times the change in the Earth year, yeah? 50 feet, bearing in mind, is about 131 million feet. That is the kind of precision. And in a sense, they seem to have deliberately chosen this, yes? Deliberately chosen this latitude to achieve that ratio. So it validates physically the change to the Earth year. And they needed to embody this structurally in the shape. But here's the other thing. This, you know, the base perimeter, it's a square base. The side length of the Great Pyramid, slightly under 756 feet, just slightly. The The total perimeter then, if you basically you multiply that by 4, it's 3,024 feet. Well, here's the other one. If you take that small circle circumference, yeah, and you divide it by this 3,024, right, you actually get the value for the Earth tropical year, currently 365.24, basically multiplied by 100. So it's 36,524 or so. I'm just trying to not give you the decimal points reeling off to too much here, but it's all a very elegant mathematical system. It tells you that the Great Pyramid was sited where it was based upon a change to the Earth's tropical year. It tells you the physical structure was determined again based upon a harmonious linkage to the value of the tropical year in days, but multiplied by 100. That determined the base perimeter of it, yes. But going even beyond this then, if you look at such as Stonehenge, there are connections between Stonehenge and the Great Pyramid. And another point.
I was just going to say, I think that all these ancient structures are somehow connected, because I always wondered how people on one side of the planet knew the plans for these pyramids and things on the other side of the planet, because they're all over the place.
Yeah, I actually think that they were built ultimately by a global civilization. I mean, once you realize that the latitude of the Great Pyramid was determined by that ratio, you could either be working in the northern hemisphere or the southern. But whoever basically wanted to set it up, the latitude was determined by that ratio. In other words, it wasn't a local project built in Egypt. It would have been a global civilization that would have gone to wherever they needed to go on the Earth to set it up where they did. And these structures, I definitely believe, are energetic structures. I think we can totally dismiss the tomb nonsense. These were devices of some sort. But in that example of the Great Pyramid, then you can see how the latitude was determined by the ratios. But here's another one for you. If you actually take the small circle circumference and divide it by the equator for the Great Pyramid, you'll get practically dead on your calculator, 0.84. And then you'll get like 4 zeros, if you will, after that. So it's an exceptionally precise fraction of 21 divided by 25. Now, Stonehenge, it was based upon a fraction between the small circle circumference and the equator, and that was 75 divided by 128. And the reason I'm building up to this is because if you go to the pyramid on Mars, the D&M pyramid, right, Mars is like the Earth. It's not a perfect sphere. It's a slightly squashed sphere, right? Now, there was a remote viewing study I read about. Somebody went to this pyramid. This was, again, it's a recent copy of Nexus magazine. There was an article in there about a secret remote viewing experiment in the 80s. Somebody had given some coordinates to a remote viewer for various locations to go to Mars and just observe what they saw. And they went to the coordinates for the D&M pyramid, right? And the latitude coordinate is 40.893 degrees north, right? Well, here's the thing. If you were to go, and again, I'm citing the US Naval Observatory, they give you a very exacting answer for the equatorial radius of Mars and also a flattening measure. It's deviation from the sphere, yes? With those two values known, we know the entire elliptical circumference. And if we know that it's located at a latitude of 40.893, I did a little check because I was looking at the significance of the small circle circumference at the latitude related to the equatorial circumference of the Earth for Stonehenge. I did the same comparison to this pyramid on Mars at this 40.893 latitude. And it turns out, using these US Naval Observatory's dimensions, right, if you do the division sum, small circle circumference divided by equatorial circumference at the 40.893 where this pyramid is, the answer you'll get on your calculator is 0.71999977. You get 0.71 and then 3 nines, which is strongly hinting at 0.72, right? And I think that was the critical ratio, which is the fraction 18 divided by 25. That was why they cited it where they did, to attain that ratio. It's the same sort of consideration as the pyramids on the Earth. You see?
That's fascinating.
And the mathematics on that is so exacting, as I say. You find you're just making subtle shifts to the locations of these monuments to get some very exacting ratios. So this was one of the things I was looking at. But where the story gets even more intriguing is this. If you look at certain structures on the Earth, modern structures, and now I'm talking about military intelligence type installations like Pine Gap or Menwith Hill. Have you heard of these facilities?
Yes, I have.
They were built with exactly the same consideration in mind and positioned where they were that the ancients were using for Menwith Hill, for Stonehenge and the Great Pyramid, and even Buckley Air Force Base, the Utah facility just built, the Dimona Israeli nuclear plant. All these facilities, the connections between them are quite incredible. And I definitely want to go into those. I can see we're coming up to a break, though, aren't we, shortly?
Yeah, we are coming up to a break in just a few minutes. And I got to say, this has been pretty fascinating already. I'm looking so forward into getting into this deeper with you. So hang on with me for a moment. Let's get this break out of the way, and we'll come back and learn some more from you. So,
okay.
All right, hold on. On upcoming shows, we've got the link there as well. And I should remind you, on Thursday, we'll have Psychic Helene Olson joining us. And I haven't done a psychic show in months. So we're going to do one on Thursday with Helene. And with that, we are back, Keith. And you were just about to get into something very interesting, and we had to take that break. So let's pick right back up.
Yeah, I was wanting to discuss the echelon system, as so-called, the spy grid network, if you will. And just to give you some of the indications of how long-range the thinking is behind this. And the United States, obviously, since World War II, it has approached various countries and wanted to build various installations there, shall we say, military installations, signals intelligence facilities. And one of the main ones, one of the biggest, in fact the biggest in Europe, is the so-called Menwith Hill site, and it's located here in England, where I am, in North Yorkshire. And the coordinates given are 54 degrees latitude north, longitude about 1 degree 41 minutes or so. You can check these out. You can go into Google Earth and you can zoom right in. So I don't want to get too technical on the reeling out the locations here, but they set up the Menwith Hill site. It's a signals intelligence site. It intercepts faxes, emails, pretty much all telecommunications and so forth. And it's a great big massive rectangular set of buildings with big golf ball, if you've seen them, structures around it, the radomes. And this was built in the mid-50s, right? And here's the interesting point, right? In the mid-60s, the US went to Australia. Now, most of Australia, just generally speaking, massive open areas, lots of desert, is kind of on par with the Sahara Desert almost, but in the southern latitude, yeah? Very hot climate.
Right.
And they went to the Australian government and they said, we'd like to build, a base, on in your country. And they gave some very precise coordinates of the land they wanted. And I'm sure the Australian government were very intrigued by this as well. As long as it's nothing that's going to make us a target, say, of Soviet Russia. And they gave some innocuous name about a joint space research facility, something like, I can't remember the name, but they convinced the government in Australia to let them build a signals intelligence base. And it's the Pine Gap facility, located very much centrally almost to the geographical landmass of Australia. And if you just look at it again on Google Earth and you zoom right in, it's very much like the Menwith Hill site. You've got these big golf ball type radomes dotted around, about 20 or so, massive rectangular building complexes, you know. Mm-hmm. And the precise coordinates are about latitude 23 degrees 48 minutes south, longitude 133 degrees 44 minutes east, right? It's located near Alice Springs, as I say. Now, why did they want this particular stretch of land? Why? Well, they were thinking of two things that absolutely triangulated this very specific spot. You remember I said earlier about the Great Pyramid, and I was mentioning about the latitude considerations, yes? Mm. And I told you that the ideal set of measures that we have are based upon standard feet right now. So, and we are also dealing with a primary unit of 1 foot, and another important unit is 6,000 feet, because that's a minute of arc under the ideal Earth, yeah? 6,000 feet. Well, what they did was they took the equator of the Earth and they basically went 1,440 of these 6,000 feet units, ideal geographical miles. That was the latitude displacement, right? And now you may have heard the Great Pyramid. It's casing stones. 40, was it now? 144,000, yes? Mm-hmm. You may have seen this number a few times. The Bacton calendar of the long count, 144,000 days. You know Ceres, the dwarf planet, 1,440 days in its ideal state. I show how it transformed from that to 1,680 days, which is where it is at present. It's one of these intriguing numbers. And another thing about the Great Pyramid, if you simply divide the latitude arc from the equator to where the Great Pyramid is, if you take that arc and divide it by 756, which is the base, you get about 14,400, yeah? Very close to, it's only slight error. So this value here, 1,440 of these ideal geographical miles, that was the critical value that they used as a displacement from the equator into the southern hemisphere. Now, if you're operating on a small circle, right, parallel to the equator, right there, which is at that latitude 2348 to the south, the next consideration is, where along that line, cutting halfway through Australia, do you build the site longitude-wise? Now, do you know what the frequency rate is of electrical grids? Do you know what that is?
Not offhand, no.
It's about 60 hertz. Yeah? Okay. Maybe seem familiar. About 60 hertz. Well, here's what they did. They chose a certain point on the longitude line, yeah, to determine the longitude, such that the arc length over the surface of the Earth, right, connecting up the Menwith Hill site to the Pine Gap site, had a special ratio to the equatorial circumference, and the ratio is 3 divided by 8, right? Or if you reverse it, what this basically means is, if you take what is right now the accurate equatorial circumference of the Earth, divide that value by 8, and then multiply the value by 3, you've got an arc length distance mapped over the surface of the Earth that connects up Menwith Hill to Pine Gap. And just to show you the significance of this, because we're dealing with this ratio here, the value, which is the wavelength unit which harmonically fits 8 times into the Earth's equatorial circumference and 3 times, right, into the distance between Pine Gap and Menwith Hill, is about 3,112 miles, right?
Mhm.
Now, under the electromagnetic spectrum, you know how you got the speed of light, 186,282, yeah? If you divide that by this wavelength unit, it tells you what frequency you're dealing with. And the frequency is 60 hertz, right there, same as the electrical power grid. So
Wow.
there was extreme precision in targeting the location for building the Pine Gap site in Australia. They wanted this connection to the Menwith Hill site based upon this 8/3 ratio. And they're using the Earth itself. They're using wavelengths which fit in to the Earth itself, connecting up these sites. And this is what I'm talking about in terms of going global and setting up a network. You will tend to find that the placement of these sites, they are very carefully chosen, right? They're very carefully chosen to relate to one another. The arc length separating them will have an affinity to some dimension of the Earth. And one of the things that
So were these some kind of power grids?
well, again, this is the thing. I do believe that these sites are drawing power from the Earth in some way. There's a lot of technology regarding that, how to draw, free energy. I mean, that is a massive subject in and of itself. The whole issue of how you can draw free energy from the Earth. I mean, that's supposed to have been discovered like 100 years ago easily, maybe even earlier than that, with Nikola Tesla.
Yeah. Yep, Tesla did it, and then they raided them.
He had the Wardenclyffe Tower facility, and as an interesting point, I'll give you another one. In 1899, Tesla set up his Colorado Springs laboratory, right? And I've got the latitude for that. It's 38 degrees, 50 minutes, and 4 degrees north, right? Now, here's an interesting one for you. If you take the arc length from the equator up to that latitude and divide it by the arc length from the equator to the Great Pyramid, the value you get on your calculator is 1.296. And remember I was talking about the whole degrees, minutes, and seconds of arc?
Yes, sir.
360 degrees, 21,600 minutes of arc, and 1,296,000 seconds. 1296. Here it's a ratio. Tesla seemed to have set up his lab latitude-wise on this critical ratio of 1.296 times the Great Pyramid arc length, yes? So again, we know Tesla was looking at how you can draw energy from the Earth. We know he was engaged in that whole aspect of it. So it tells you again, the Great Pyramid is the same. It is a device, or was a device. And again, it seems that we're replicating the same sort of setup with this. And there's been a lot of UFO activity reported at Pine Gap, and that's because it's very remote, so you could probably get away with that, whereas you couldn't necessarily at Menwith Hill. One of the things that I've seen reported about Pine Gap that may have leaked out is that they've built they've drilled a massive tunnel right into Pine Gap, and some people are saying about 5 miles deep. And I find that interesting because just like the Great Pyramid was built with dimensions that harmonically fitted with respect to the Earth and the Earth's pulsation rate, if you want to consider the tropical year value to be that, I would imagine that the depth of this shaft is probably to relay, it's going to be some kind of harmonic fit to the Earth, or the circumference of the Earth at the latitude of the site. I would imagine that they're replicating the same science in some way, although they haven't actually built a great big pyramid, say, at Pine Gap.
I see. Now, earlier you had mentioned how the solar system was in harmony and that something had knocked it out of harmony. What would have done that? Are we talking about some celestial body coming through the solar system or something along those lines, or is it much more complex?
It's nothing whatsoever to do with that idea. This is something very fundamental and almost universal. I would even be going into some of the deep mysteries regarding, I mean, you can look at some of the Gnostic texts like the Pistis Sophia. I mean, as an example, when Jesus is talking about how when certain expansions of the universe occur, he went in and altered the configuration of everything. There are other references towards stars, it's like a rebellion. You may have heard of celestial rebellion. The planets, they were good as long as they kept within their bounds, but they decided to go out of bounds, and this caused an agitation of the system. There are all kinds of myths in that area. This goes back to a kind of a cosmic beginning. If you look at the ancient myth of, as I said, regarding the whole thing, for the Egyptians about the curse of Ra upon Nut, the introduction to that myth talks about this began at a time very, very far, back in the past when gods and goddesses were still coming into being. This is almost like an early age in the cosmos. You're talking on a vast time scale. I couldn't even put a place on it, but it is like some sort of fundamental rupture altered the configuration, and I don't think it's just our solar system. I think this is more universal than that even. But this is, it's not to with one single celestial body coming in and disrupting it. All of them are dynamically transformed in a reconfiguration, something very fundamental, an aspect of how the universe naturally unfolded. Maybe a principle of disorder, you could say, crept in. You might be thinking of Plato in that regard.
Yeah. So that's one of the questions that had come up in the chat earlier is, so when scientists say, oh, there was a Big Bang, do you buy into that? Or, I mean, where do you think all this started from?
I don't think there's ever been a beginning as such. I mean, I think there's a line in the Corpus Hermetica about this, talking about a pre-principle that exists before a beginning without end. I think we are talking about the ultimate perpetual motion machine in terms of the universe. It could never come to a stop. It's constantly evolving and changing and transforming, because the foundation of it is the infinite. I don't really buy the Big Bang theory. I'm a bit more steady state, if you know Fred Hoyle's view. I do think the idea of matter continuously coming into existence is correct, but at the same time, matter withdraws as well. And it does so cyclically. And you will have a net increase where matter comes in, and then a decrease where it withdraws. But the whole process never ends. I don't believe that there's one Big Bang ultimate theory to it. From what I gather, this Big Bang theory has so many holes in it, it's unbelievable. And it's not a theory that has ever predicted anything. It's a theory that fails to make predictions, and the astrophysicists just fudge it and just keep making up new rules to make it fit. This is some of the criticism I've heard of it, so don't call me out on all the technicalities, but that's what I've heard. But
when they don't understand something, they throw something on there to just make themselves sound intelligent. So then you would say then basically as the universe is expanding, on the other end, it's declining. So the more it expands, the more, so eventually are parts of the universe going to expand and then other parts disappear because of that expansion? Or does it,
I'd go with such as Walter Russell's theory on this. You're looking at a universal vacuum of absolute rest, of zero curvature. Tension is created in that medium by, should I say, the finger of God. Tension is created in it, a bit like having a fast-moving stream, uniform motion of water. It looks completely, like frozen and glacious, but it's constantly moving straight. Imagine you got your finger and just dipped it in. You create ripples, you create curvature and tension, whereas before there wasn't any. And when we look at matter, what Walter Russell said, who's a theorist from the early 20th century, he said matter is motion, right? And so if you bring motion into existence, right, you bring matter into existence. When something ceases to move, it withdraws from existence back into the zero vacuum, and the matter itself withdraws. It's all about spiraling centripetal motion that builds up form and spherical forms, form from formlessness, right, in a very dynamic way. And this is done in pulsating cycles. And then when you've built up a form, through centrifugal motion of expansion, it unravels back to the universal. Look at the unity of, things which may exist on a large scale, which can exist for millions or billions of years like stars, continuously evolving in a large macroscopic sense before eventually disappearing or blowing up. And then you can look about particles, when people talk about a particle existing for a fraction of a second and then it's gone again. And they're on a much shorter scale. So you have things going off at the subatomic level and at the macroscopic level, and you have organization of small subatomic things to create macroscopic forms. But the whole thing plays out in a dynamic dance where particles have certain states of form and tension, and then they unwind centrifugally.
That's fascinating. So now, I like to skip around sometimes, but now going back to the whole Mars Earth connection, so then we can, I know that there's structures up there. I've seen the pictures. So if there's a connection with those to those that we have here on Earth, then would you think it was two separate races, or were they using both planets, or, was it us that was on Mars, you think?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, I mentioned just previously that I read an article about the coordinates for this massive pyramid, the D&M pyramid, the five-sided one on Mars. And I believe it was referring to a group of extraterrestrials, or rather people that looked kind of like us but were a lot taller and thinner, maybe about 10 feet tall. And if I recall correctly from this article, it was saying that the remote view was targeting about 500,000 years before the present, right? And they were there, these other beings. And I think there's a more recent one. I'd have to just check this, because I was almost going to email him. Have you ever heard the work of Courtney Brown?
Oh, yes. I've had him on the show a few times.
Oh, yes. Excellent work. I've seen some of his video presentations. And he did one about Atlantis recently, and also did one just very recently about the Great Pyramid. Have you seen that one?
As a matter of fact, yes. The last time he was on the show, he had sent that to me prior. So yeah, you're talking about the documentary that he did. Yes. The
remote viewing of the Great Pyramid and how it was built.
I did.
And he said that it was alien beings that were using human labor on the Earth. I mean, it's like straight out of the Stargate movie from, is it 1994, Kurt Russell and James Spader. Yeah. An extraterrestrial lands and uses humans that are already here to help construct this big pyramid. And he talked about, a mantis extraterrestrial race, or at least one of the beings there was a kind of a mantis-like being, But another one, this was one of the strangest things. He talked about another extraterrestrial. One of the reviewers said it looked like a demonic being, and it was actually conducting a human sacrifice. And so they seem to be described in this documentary as two different types of extraterrestrials, although seemingly engaged on the same project. So when you look at that, and you also look at some of the things about the connections to the Mars pyramid, I mean, I think Courtney Brown has done some remote viewing of some structures on Mars at present. I don't know if the D&M pyramid was there, but I think that they did some, and I think the time frame was not 500,000 years BC, but the present time, and they were talking about humans like our size, normal humans, if you will, look to be humanoids on Mars working at various projects. But the description given seems to be pretty much like the remote viewers from the 80s, when they were looking at the extraterrestrials from, say, 500,000 years ago. They seem to be, engaged in some kind of project where everything's decaying around them, that It's like they're almost stranded there. They're doing some kind of work. It's depressing. They're cut off from their own civilization. It's just a story like that. So when you look at these structures, I do think that there is an extraterrestrial connection to such as the Great Pyramid. I'm definitely up for believing that they were built by extraterrestrials. I think that the work of Courtney Brown is exceptional, and I do think that I'd go with that. They're definitely built by highly advanced civilizations. But when we look at ourselves, although we seem to have gone through repeated, we rise and we fall. And a lot of this is tied into celestial disruptions. We get caught in meteor streams. We may even blow ourselves up when we get to a technological state. That was one of the remote viewing sessions that Courtney did from about 70,000 years ago. I seen, the Toba disaster, where we had this bottleneck, a genetic bottleneck, seems to be because we reached a high point of civilization then and disrupted the Earth's crust, causing massive, destruction to the planet, and only just survived. And it looks like today we're probably engaging in the same sorts of secret science, putting ourselves at risk again.
Why is this, do you think, that we just keep, I call it repeating history? I mean, in a sense. So why does this keep happening? I mean, is this the plan? I mean, is it in the energy, or?
It's hard to say, because I mean, if you think about the universe, it's got certain laws, there are laws governing things, and they're like self-executive, it's like the law of gravity, if you want to put it that way. We suffer the consequences of our actions. What is it that drives some people to risk things on great scientific projects? Like when the first atomic bomb was being planned, somebody did a calculation because they were worried that it would ignite the entire atmosphere of the Earth. Somebody was actually doing that calculation. They kind of satisfied themselves that they thought that it wouldn't, but they still went ahead with it anyway. I mean, it's just incredible that these things are even thought about.
Well,
I believe some of the...
That would send ripples out into the universe, wouldn't it?
Well, on another topic that I'm definitely hoping to get into, if possible, it was the issue of nuclear weapons, because this also is mentioned in my book, The Lost Stage of High Knowledge, because, again, we see that nuclear weapons are not like ordinary devices, and they appear when they are triggered to cause a space-time disruption. And what I discuss in my book, I discuss several nuclear tests and show that, like I've been discussing the ratios present that link different sites on the Earth to one another. When nuclear devices are triggered, they seem to be triggered in such a way that the location of the device on the ground is tied into the locations in an angular separation sense to, such as the sun or the moon or other celestial bodies. They seem to be related in this way, as if the devices themselves are tapping into resonant energy present within the solar system, or present as it plays out over the Earth. It is a very complex subject to get into, but that's one of the deepest mysteries of nuclear weapons. And it's also the solution to understanding earthquakes as well. That's what that's the great thing about both earthquakes and nuclear weapons, at least in purposes of evaluating them. We know exactly when the nuclear tests were done. We've got the declassified archives, so we know it literally down to the nearest second when the device was triggered. We know the latitude, longitude coordinates, so we can evaluate the location of the device relative to, say, the location of the sun. This is one of the things that Bruce Cathie looked at, the guy I mentioned earlier. He was able to forecast when certain tests were going to be done based upon the relationship between the sun and the device. And when I heard that, when I saw it in his books, I thought, this is incredible. I couldn't believe it at first. I honestly couldn't. And so I had to really look into that just to satisfy myself that it worked and that it was real. And I had a look at devices like Bravo, Trinity, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Grapple Y, Tsar Bomber. These are like the big ones there, the most prominent. Shot Bravo, 1954, was the highest yield atmospheric test by the United States, 15 megatons. King, that was 500,000 tons of TNT, the highest yield fission device. Trinity was the first device. And what I did was, I'll just give you the basic methodology because it's so intriguing. This was the analysis in my book. If you imagine the following, right? Let's say we've got a nuclear device, say Shot Bravo, just as an example here. It was detonated on the 28th of February 1954 at precisely 18 hours 45 minutes GMT. Right, we've got the precise coordinates. Right, it was 11.69 degrees north, 165.27 east. There's a few more numbers after the decimal point, but just bottom line is this: we know when the device is triggered. So if you go to certain astronomy programs, what you're wanting to work out is the following: if you freeze time and freeze the solar system and the rotation of the Earth, right at the moment the bomb's triggered, yeah. And you draw a straight line between the center of the sun and the center of the Earth. That line will pierce through the Earth's surface, and you'll have an on-the-ground latitude, longitude. Yes? Excuse me. Mm-hmm. What you're looking for, and what you model, using a highly accurate Earth ellipsoid model, is the arc length separating the ground position of, say, the sun and the latitude and longitude of the device. And you will find, when you look at this type of arc length between different nuclear tests, that there will all be basic mathematical or musical ratios, right, for the major tests done in the early stage in the 50s. And just to give you an example, remember how I said that between the Pine Gap and Menwith Hill site, they were going with a ratio of 8 divided by 3, right? For the equatorial circumference of the Earth to the connecting line between two sites, yeah? If you look at the arc length of Shot Bravo, right, to Shot King, right, King was done on November 15th, 1952, the arc length from King, ground zero, to the sun ground position, yeah? And the arc length from Bravo, ground position, to the sun ground position, yeah? The ratio between them is literally 8/3, same ratio as the one with the Menwith Hill site. And if you do that on your calculator, just to give you, I'm not even exaggerating this. If you use the U.S. Naval Observatory's own software, the ICE, the Interactive Computer Ephemeris, 0.51 for the positions of the planets, use a true Earth ellipsoid model, yeah, the International 1924 model in use at that time, and you use a great circle calculator, yeah, the answer you'll get for those arc lengths, right, using the locations of the devices, is 2.6666256. So you get like 4 sixes after the decimal point. The level of accuracy in this is incredible. And I'll give you a couple more. Hiroshima, right, the same kind of latitude, the same kind of arc length from when the device was detonated just over the city, just slightly above ground, yeah? That precise time and location, we know what it is. You can work out where the sun was. You can work out the arc length from where that device is to the sun on the ground. But you also find that not just those types of arc lengths, but like I've been saying previously, the pure latitude displacement arc from the equator up latitude-wise into the northern or southern hemisphere, that elliptical arc is also part of this. Grapple Y is the highest yield device ever tested by the United Kingdom. 1958, 28th of April, it was on Christmas Island. We've got the exact latitude, and if you work out the latitude of it, again, you get some very interesting results. But if I actually just this particular one here involves both arc lengths for the bomb to the sun ground position. Yeah, for Hiroshima, the arc length for that one divided by the same arc length for grapple Y, and you get on your calculator 1.4999186 as a calculation, which is the fraction 3/2, 3 divided by 2. I looked at these and I thought, I can't dismiss this. This cannot be due to chance. These are the most prominent tests I can, evaluated. And you're getting arc lengths over a true ellipsoid form matching up beautifully to these kind of musical ratios almost, which are all related to one another with exceptional precision, and it led me to think, how can this be? I mean, because we tend to think, you've got your nuclear bomb, it's a device, you've got your plutonium core, you've got your shaped charges around it, you fire your charges, you implode the core to a supercritical state, you bombard it with some neutrons, you get your chain reaction effect, everything implodes and then massively outward explosion, mushroom cloud, the whole lot. You're thinking to yourself, all I need is the device, the internal workings and the material of the device is enough to trigger the explosion. What all this is saying is, no. The device essentially seems to be tapping in to some, dare I say, cosmic energy. It seems to be tapping in to the frequencies related to arc lengths playing out over the surface of the Earth, energetic arc lengths, which are present due to angular separations between the device and various celestial bodies on the surface of the Earth. And I didn't at first get the solution to this or come up with an explanatory theory until I started to look at earthquakes. You see, we have some very accurate monitors around the Earth, yeah? Yes, an earthquake goes off, it's registered, you'll see that little needle go up and down on the little machines, yeah? We've got the databases, and they'll tell you down to the nearest second exactly when it was registered. We've got accurate longitude latitudes, yeah? So all I did was the same analysis, right, with earthquakes, right, that I did for nuclear weapons. I just substituted in the longitude latitude coordinates for the epicenter of an earthquake for what was the ground zero coordinates for a nuclear test. And when I looked at some prominent earthquakes, I found all the same sorts of things going on, the same ratios and everything. And this leads me on to describe perhaps one of the most significant, if not the most significant earthquake that has occurred in recent times, and that's the 9.01 that occurred just off Japan. Yeah, the one that gave us the Fukushima meltdown.
Oh, I think we all know well and good
about
yes. That one.
Well, let me tell you something quite incredible about this earthquake. And again, anybody can verify what I'm about to say. But I'll just give you a little primer in resonance first. When we talk about resonance as it pertains to, say, physical structures, you imagine an object of certain dimensions, yes? Mm-hmm. And obviously it's got a certain, say, diameter or whatever, yeah? If you impinge upon this object with an energetic waveform, propagating wave, which is going to have a certain frequency and a certain wavelength, yeah, peak to peak or trough to trough, yeah. If you impinge upon the object with a waveform and the wavelength of the waveform will fit in a whole number of times to the dimensions of the object, yeah, what it does is it internally reflects that wave back inside the object and sets up these frozen standing wave patterns, yes? And then the target object goes into a state of agitation, yes, starts to shake. And if the power is great enough, it can fail. The physical object can crack, yes? So the key thing is here about getting the target object hit with a waveform which fits in a whole number of times, yes? Mm. So, the Japanese earthquake, bearing what I've just said in mind, here is from the USGS, yeah? This is all on the web, anybody can look this up. The time of the earthquake, 11th of March 2011, 5 hours, 46 minutes, 24 seconds, Universal Time. Location, 38.322 north, 142.369 degrees east. That's from the USGS. Now, we've got a precise time. We can plug that in to an astronomical almanac calculator, right, to tell us where the positions of the planets are, and in particular, in this case, the Sun. We're using the most advanced model we have. It's called the VSOP 87D theory. It's the best one out there. You know, astronomers know about this stuff, but just take it from me. So we put the exact universal time in, and we get the coordinates for the Sun in terms of its, and we project these onto the ellipsoid Earth form, the WGS 84 Earth form, yeah, and we get the latitude of the Sun mapped onto the Earth and also its longitude. That is that straight line I spoke about, the straight line between the center of the Earth and the center of the Sun. It pierces through the Earth's surface, the Sun ground position. So we get the precise coordinates, right, using that modeling. This is the latitude for the Sun, and I get 3.866081 degrees south, longitude 95.9422 degrees east. In other words, if you were to actually place yourself at those coordinates, right, at that exact universal time when the earthquake struck, and you look up into the sky, right at the zenith, right at the 90 degree zenith, there's the Sun, yeah? Mm-hmm. You see? Now, here's the thing. If you work out then the arc length separating the epicenter of the earthquake to the Sun ground position, right, in feet, that arc length is 21,913,544 feet. Now here's the clincher. If you take that value, right, and you input it into the following, if you basically take the equatorial, the circular equatorial circumference of the Earth, right, and divide by that value, the answer you will get on your calculator will be 5.9999291. That's 5 nines after decimal point, right? In other words, that arc length fits in practically dead on 6 times into the equatorial circumference of the Earth, giving you the resonant agitation and implying that the an amplitude point of one of these 6 waves was where that earthquake struck. High precision stuff, okay? Don't let anybody tell you we can't forecast earthquakes with extreme accuracy. We can, even years in advance based on this mathematics, right? So it tells you that somebody will have known about this. Now, what I will say as a little qualifier is, when you look at nuclear weapons and then you also look at earthquakes in the way I've just described, you'll find that the arc lengths and ratios seem to be very interchangeable. So this could imply one of 2 things regarding, say, the Fukushima disaster. Either A, somebody set up a device, right, just like a nuclear weapon device is set up, and triggered it to cause the earthquake by disrupting that specific location when the Sun was in the correct position for this energetic setup. In other words, somebody artificially stimulated it to trigger the earthquake. Or it could be that the earthquake was entirely natural, based upon the natural movements of the celestial spheres. You see, this is what nuclear weapons do. They tap into a natural mechanism of the solar system. And this, it goes to the heart of some of the, you know, we're talking earlier about matter coming into the universe and moving out, right? This is where I came up with a general theory of how our solar system kind of works, if you will. You see, obviously we've got, say, 9 major planets in our solar system. We've got the Moon around the Earth, and we've got the Sun, right? Some planets are bigger than others, right? Well, if you look at, what I'm about to tell you now is my own general theory of what an earthquake is, right, and how they occur. We have at present in the solar system, yeah, as I said, we've got many planets, right? And if you just look at the Earth itself, and you look at, say, the USGS information, yeah, regarding earthquakes, we have something like 1.5 million earthquakes occur every year or so. Most of those are like you couldn't even feel them, yeah. They're the magnitude like 2.0 and below, yeah. But you know the Richter scale, as you go up, you get to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, going up to 8 and 9. It's an exponential scale. So we have, in terms of lower magnitude earthquakes, they're almost like modeled statistically, yeah. But when you get up to, say, an earthquake 9.0, between about 8 to 9, there's only about 2 such earthquakes occur every year. Between about 7 to 8, there's only about 15 that occur every year. Between about 6 to 7, there's only about 130 occur every year. And between about 5 to 6, it's about 1,300, and then about 13,000 from 4 to 5. And you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So earthquakes statistically of the higher magnitudes, like the Japan one, they stand out statistically. They stand out almost deterministically. You can determine them. But when you go lower and lower and lower, it's as if you're going to be modeling things in a statistical way in terms of a disruption to the Earth, yes? Now, what I think is going on when you have an earthquake is this, and this is a pretty esoteric one. It's almost a bit looking at some of the quantum mechanics stuff, but only in a macro realm. You hear about particles jumping orbits in quantum mechanics. Well, this is what I think goes on when you have an earthquake. If you have an earthquake, say on the Earth, a significant earthquake, say, at a precise location, what I think occurs is this. You've got a measure of matter locally underneath the planet withdrawing in a kind of quantum mechanics sense, withdrawing from that location and being transmitted to another location and emerging simultaneously under the surface of another celestial body, yes, without going through the matter or the space in between. There's a local emergence at one location with at the other location a withdrawal. And so you're going to have a pairing. And I think that what happens is, with all earthquakes, all the planets are literally in that way shifting matter between themselves. So if you have matter withdrawing from just under the surface of one body, it's going to cause a disruption, and that is the earthquake. That matter is then emerging into a space already occupied by matter, giving a disruption at the other end, giving an earthquake at that end, yes? And I think that when you look at all the millions of earthquakes set for the Earth, yeah, this low-level statistical stuff building up to the high-level stuff.
Well, they have picked up, it seems, the last few years that the earthquakes have, not seems, they actually have. They've increased tremendously, and some speculate that they have the technology, that is the governments, have the technology to mess with that frequency and cause an earthquake.
Oh yes, I've no doubt about that. They can indeed trigger earthquakes. They would be actually stimulating a celestial configuration that is significant but wouldn't cause too much of a disruption on its own. But if they stimulate it, they can draw more power from another celestial body in a pairing with the Earth. But the point I'm making is, I believe that earthquakes are a result of matter withdrawal from one celestial body just under the surface and an emergence at the other, yeah? So we can talk about planets over millions of years or so having either a net gain if they're on a cycle where the mass is increasing and they're expanding, whereas in other planets there'll be a kind of shrinking and their mass will be reduced. And I think that when you look at, say, the Earth's pattern of earthquakes, all the other planets are going to have similar kinds of patterns, yes? And due to the movements, the dynamic movement of all the planets around, the configurations, for the most part, are unremarkable. And so you have this low-level statistical kind of shift of matter. But when you get these significant earthquakes, obviously more matter is involved in either withdrawing from one body and emerging in others. And the reason why I mention this is because there's a researcher called, I think it's James Maxlaw, and he's looked at the Earth itself going backwards, and he's basically shown that the Earth does appear to be increasing in size. And if we go back many, many millions of years, right, the Earth was a lot smaller. And I think he said if we shrink the Earth to 52% of its current size, you know, the continents that are all just looking like they fit together like a jigsaw puzzle, they all do appear to fit together, yeah? And so he's looked at that. Now, if you combine his size changes with the mass changes that I'm talking about, you get, you know, you can see where we're coming from here. And just to add to that, you know, the dinosaurs that were around, you know, the 65 million year mark and so forth, the dinosaurs from these periods, you know, tens of millions of years ago, there was an incredible study I was reading, and this was from, it's been around for a while, a few decades. I think it was from a Boston university. And they were looking at dinosaurs, like the Diplodocus, you know, massive great creatures, big long necks, several bus lengths in size and so forth, and also some of the flying, like pterodactyl type creatures. And what they found was incredibly, they said that these creatures could not exist on the Earth at present. They could only have existed if the gravity field of the Earth was about 25 to 30% of what it is right now, because they could not have even stood under their own weight and anatomically. And they were even pointing to some of the winged creatures and saying they would not have been able to fly, you know, if they couldn't have even got off the ground based upon the weight of them. So they were saying that the mass of the Earth, well, obviously, if you're talking about the gravity being weaker, the mass of the Earth would be less. So it's just one more thing that fits into the overall trend here, yes?
That is fascinating. So then if the planet is growing, eventually, I mean, it's just going to keep doing that then. And eventually, what, will become bigger or smaller or extinct?
Well, this is the thing. You've just hit upon an interesting point there, because whereas we can get gradual increases in mass or gradual decreases, this is a very dangerous mechanism, because we have currently the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, yes? And this had a planet which blew up. In fact, some of the theories going are for a multiple exploded planet hypothesis, because some of the debris of the asteroid belt suggests multiple bodies. They blew up.
Yeah.
And I believe that the reason why they blew up is because of this mechanism, right? This mechanism can trigger abnormal energy shifts between planets. And again, this is one of the dangers. We artificially, as humans, if we're daft enough to do it, could even interfere with these natural energy flows between planets, artificially stimulating a situation which could either blow up the Earth or blow up other planets. And that's not really an exaggeration. This is why you talk about earthquakes, artificially stimulating them. I mean, just for the sake of argument, you know, the highest yield device, atmospheric nuclear bomb that was set off was Tsar bomber, 1961, I believe, Soviet Russia. It was 58 megatons, yeah? 58 megatons. Well, you can actually look at earthquakes in terms of yield. You can convert the yield of an earthquake, if you will, into a TNT yield. And there's a chart that I got from a university that actually said a 9.0 earthquake, right, has the equivalent energy of 32,000 megatons of TNT. Remember, the highest yield atmospheric one was just 58 megatons. A 9.0 earthquake, 32,000 megatons. I mean, it puts things in perspective. It's a good job it's all contained roughly, you know, below ground, if you will, in the way it works. But it just because if we're even talking about triggering things like that, you're going off the scale. I mean, you know,
Yeah,
you
no
just think about
underground,
how that could just go too far.
no underground bunker is going to save you if that happens. And I wonder if through time, if different planets become habitable in this solar system and other ones don't, because you look at Mars, and I don't know, I'm one who believes that there's a lot more going on up there than what they tell us. And I don't know if we could actually live on the planet and just breathe the air, but I've seen some pretty interesting stuff that says maybe we could, or maybe at least we used to. So I wonder if these planets take turns, so to speak.
Well, yeah, it's like I was saying about the shift in the solar system. The planets will shift positions, and depending on how close you are to the sun, you're going to be a life-bearing planet or not. And what you're saying about Mars, I totally agree. There are a lot of interesting stuff about that, and not just Mars, but even the Moon. You see, with the Moon, we've got fluttering flags being planted into the ground, haven't we? We've got, there's an atmosphere there, there's wind on the Moon. You just got to wonder about it. I'm definitely somebody that thinks there's a lot more to the Moon than meets the eye. I do think that man has landed on the Moon. I'm not one of those people that think it never happened, but I will say that I do believe that they have some studio footage they did for training purposes. They mixed in with legitimate Moon footage, and I think that's one of the things that's muddied the water, because they did lots of experiments on sets that they built, and some of the photos, they're so carefully crafted. I mean, do you know the lunar module? Yeah, it's supposed to have a big rocket thrust coming out of it when it lands. Yeah, and they're showing you photos from it on the Moon, and you've got them gold-plated little tripod legs, little legs planted in the ground. Yeah, not a single scrap of dust on them. Nothing all around. Perfect, as if it were just plonked there. You get the feeling some of these photos were from the studio. From the lighting effects and the rest of it.
That's what I think. I think that they really went there. But I think that the footage we're shown is not the actual footage from the Moon. And I
think some of it, though, maybe. But you see, this is the other thing. I'm also tempted to think that the gravitational field on the Moon is not 1/6, but very close to the Earth's. And I've even tried to model this. And you know how some of the data suggests the Moon is hollow and it rings like a bell. Well, if you have a mass value that's hollow, it models differently to as if you assume all the mass is located at the dead center of the object per the Newtonian big equation with a big G in. If you model it in a hollow way, even if you assume the general inverse square law and use gravity, you can get high surface gravity, which then drops off rapidly. I've not come up with a precise answer that satisfies me, because the math will be too complicated for me, but it's so interesting when you look at it. I mean, there were the footage I just saw recently, and this just goes to show you, this is what I believe is authentic Moon footage. This was just a couple of weeks ago, and it was almost portrayed as a joke. One of the astronauts was on the surface of the Moon, right, and he was hammering something into the ground, right, some kind of flag or some kind of rod or something, and he drops his hammer. And what follows is he's like dancing around his hammer, just trying to just kick it slightly so his handle will just stand up on end, so he can just reach down slightly and grab it. And he's dancing around. And there was a particular communication, and I don't think it was the same. It was relation to a different astronaut. Somebody said to another astronaut, he said, "Make sure you don't fall over. You might not be able to get back up again." And this guy's dancing around this hammer, and he says, "I'm going to have to go and get some tongs." I mean, he can't just reach down and pick it. Yet if it's 1/6 gravity, the guy should be doing somersaults and everything. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So why can't he reach down and pick it? And I can't believe that footage was shot in a studio on Earth, because otherwise it'd make NASA intentionally look like idiots. You know what I mean? It just seems to me, hey, the gravity's really strong and he can't bend down. And the minute you admit the gravity is really strong, the next thing you go to is the lunar module and you say, hey, wait a minute, how come it took a Saturn V rocket to get up from the Earth? And if the gravity is as strong as the Earth on the Moon, how can this little lunar module get back up into, and then you go anti-gravity technology. You know what I mean? You're going down all these roads, and you realise that there's suppressed technology involved with it all. You know, it's all like that. So there's so many things out there. And again, with the Mars thing, I believe that when the footage, was it the Viking, when the first footage came back of the Mars, this is from Richard Hoagland's book. He says there was a guy going round turning the settings, the colour settings on the monitors, so that the atmosphere looked all red. But when they were actually looking at it originally, it looked like blue skies, like out of Arizona, you know, with a desert sand.
Yeah, exactly.
So I definitely think, again, and going by the remote viewing things, I'm sure they were talking about wind-swept areas and things. Again, it might not be totally, you know, breathable air, but it might be the sense that a person could have a bit of an oxygen mask on, but not need some protective suit all around. The atmosphere might not be toxic to us, but we might, you know, we might need to breathe something in, but we might, you know, be able to walk round, you know, with a t-shirt and short shorts on. Do you know if you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly. Hold on with us for a minute, Keith. We know where you're calling from. Rochester, correct?
That's correct, Mike.
Bruce,
how are you, Mr. Hunter?
Not too bad, thanks.
Yeah, I'm calling from New York State on the east coast of the U.S., just so you know where I'm located. I have a question that has, let's say, made me wonder for many, many, many years. Why is it that as we look at the moon, we always see the same side of the moon? Is the gravitational attraction between both bodies that strong that it will not allow the moon to have any rotation around its own axis?
I have to say, in terms of a technical answer to that, I am not entirely certain. I know what the conventional scientists will say to you. They will say that its daily rotation is a match to its orbit, in which case that's why. But from what I gather, it doesn't always exactly give you the perfect facing. I think it's something like, is it 59% of it we see? It fluctuates slightly, but it's kind of held that way. I'm not sure fully about it, but I do think there's more to the moon than meets the eye. And I think that because it seems to be hollow per some of these experiments done, I do think the gravity acceleration away from it, it does not conform to an inverse square law in the way that it does from the Earth. So if that's part of the puzzle, then that might be it. But I really couldn't answer the question fully, I have to say.
Okay, so excuse my voice; it's a little froggy today. What you're saying then, Keith, is that there are some rotation of the moon a little bit, so that we don't always see exactly the same face.
Yeah.
Is that what you said?
Yeah, I think that it just wobbles slightly, if you see what I'm saying. So it might be that, I'm just thinking the percentages. I think somebody said in an article I read about 59%. In other words, we do see a slight fluctuation, but predominantly most of the moon, on the dark side, we do not see at all. But it
right,
does,
I understand that, but it just has always amazed me that that moon, which is a fairly large body, seems to have no rotation of its own. You know, even if it was very, very, very slow, but it does not seem to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really sure, as I said, what the answer could be to that one in all honesty. I mean, you just wonder whether it's not necessarily just gravity that's the answer. Maybe there's some kind of electrical effects, but it's not really a question I know answer to in all honesty, beyond my expertise.
Okay, well, you did give me a little bit of information that I had never suspected, and that is the fact that it does wobulate a small amount. and not enough that we would notice it. So I thank you for the answer, Mr. Hunter, and I'll let you get on with the rest of the program.
Okay, right. Thanks for your question.
Thank you, Bruce.
Okay, thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Right. Great. Always great to hear from Bruce. That brings up a question for me. So if the gravity would be a much more of a force than what they lead us on to believe, then would that gravity be because of Earth? Or because obviously if the moon's not, if it doesn't have its own rotation, then what would be causing that gravity?
Well, gravity has nothing to do with rotation per se. It's nothing to do with that, no.
Oh.
The way it's modeled, the standard view is that if you have mass, then you will have a measure of gravity associated with that mass, because it will give you a curvature of space-time, a kind of a potential, a well potential. A bit, I think the standard analogy is you get a big mattress, you put a big ball in the middle, and it gives you the curvature there. What I'm saying is,
I thought the rotation had some little to do with it, but I guess I'm learning something new.
Yeah, I don't think that. Obviously they all rotate, all objects rotate. They've got mass, but the way it's modelled, it's like, I know it sounds a bit weird even when you think about it, but the way gravity acceleration's model is, you assume that the whole of the mass is located at a singularity point at the center of the object. For example, it's like, let's say you've got an astronaut stood on the moon, and he weighs, I don't know, 200 pounds, say, yeah, he's there, that's his weight. The radius of the moon is 1,080 miles, yeah? So you're going to have a value, if you look in the textbooks, for the mass of the moon in, say, pounds or whatever, and you assume as if the astronaut is stood in space 1,080 miles, and all the mass of the moon is concentrated at this singularity point, right at the center of the moon there, yeah? And there's the Newtonian equation, if you will, universal gravitational constant multiplied by mass 1, which is the astronaut, multiplied by mass 2, which is the moon, divided by the radius, the distance between them, squared, and that gives you the force. And the force is composed of a mass and an acceleration. So it's like, the way you model it is very strange. But you see, the thing is, when I looked at the moon, I did a bit of an Excel spreadsheet. I was experimenting with some mathematics on it, and I was using, for example, the standard mass value for the moon in the textbooks. But instead of saying I'm concentrating it all at a point in the center, I started saying, let's assume it's a spherical shell. And so I was looking at it as a spherical shell, and then drawing, if you will, a straight line between all points on that shell to the surface of the moon, yes? And if you do that, the culmination of all that can give you high strength gravity, even if you're using the total mass value for the moon in the textbooks, yeah? Because you're not assuming it's all at the center, but you're modeling it spherically, then you can get high gravity on the surface of the moon, which then drops off. I realize I'm experimenting this myself, and I am not a mathematical expert, but this is what I was kind of looking at. And I don't know whether the course I'm on is even right. Maybe somebody out there more smarter than me could correct me on this, but the way it seems to work, and I'll just give you an example, something that was in the Guinness Book of Records. I read a reference to, Apollo, it was Apollo 11 when the first moon landing occurred, yeah? But prior to that, they had a couple of experiments where they had the lunar module in orbit with the main command module, I think it is. And I think what they did is they detached the lunar module, and they went down to something like 8 miles from the surface of the moon. And I think they didn't land, they only went 8 miles from the surface. And then they blasted the rocket, so went back again. If this reference is correct, it actually went into the records because the acceleration or the speed attained by the rocket was about, I think, was it 25,000 miles per hour? And I was just struck by it because that's like the same escape velocity that you need to get off the Earth with the gravity of the Earth. And it just seemed to me that they were saying that this rocket, or the lunar module, on the ascent phase, when it went down at 8 miles above them, didn't land, but then came back. It was just it was one of the preliminary, again, stages of getting nearer to the goal, but just testing things. It was as if they were trying to model the gravity. They got down to a certain level. They knew it was going to get even harder, and they were just testing it. But they needed to break away, But again, I'll give you another one, because I looked into this a bit more. There are 2 satellite probes that were launched by NASA called Grail A and Grail B. And this was only literally 1 or 2 years ago. They were both sent to the moon, and they were both going to map the gravity of the moon, maintaining an altitude of 55 kilometers above the surface, or 37 miles above the surface, going around circular. One was like trailing the other, but they were both at the same altitude, Mm-hmm. And what struck me about this, I had a look at the information NASA posted about the orbital period of both these satellites, how long it took them to go around the Earth once at that altitude, And then I worked out what the acceleration due to gravity would be at that altitude. And what it conformed to was a general inverse square law, right? So what that implies is that if NASA's telling the truth about Grail A and Grail B and not lying its head off, it would imply that if the gravity on the moon is a lot stronger than 1/6, then there is going to be an incredibly sharp increase in gravity acceleration from 37 miles up to the surface. And that just, the deviation of that to get really strong, it almost thinks like there's like an artificial gravity atmosphere around it, if that's the case. But I have no idea how you would even model that and extend it all the way to the Earth, because this is how you work out the equilibrium between different masses. The gravity extended from the Earth to the Moon and from the Moon to the Earth. And they're supposed to kind of balance, you see. So I have to say, it's one of those things that I'd love to look into more. But mathematically, I'm not an expert, and I'm probably looking at this in a very crude way, maybe even an haphazard way. But it is something that interests me, the gravity of the moon. But maybe there's smarter people out there than me on this one.
Wouldn't it be great to just be able to go and walk on the moon for just an hour? Give me an hour. I guarantee there's so much up there that we're not being told about. People speculate about the dark side of the moon, and I've seen some pretty interesting videos where it looks like there's actually some tubular structures and entranceways and things like that, and even a pyramid somebody had pointed out on the moon. So it's pretty interesting. Now there's others who even talking about it in the chat now about the moon being hollow. No, I don't believe that, but I can't prove it either way. Where do you sit with that?
You mean it being hollow?
Yes. Artificial.
Well, this is one of the experiments. I think that they found that was it now? They set off something, or was it a booster rocket that dropped onto it, and they detected it ringing like a bell, like it was hollow.
Yeah.
So again, it's just one of those things that, if it were hollow, as I said, the modelling of the mass with respect to that, does have possibilities for explaining how you can have high surface gravity, which rapidly drops off. That's why I think it could very well be hollow. Really? But I think one of the things about the moon as well is, I think you're right. There's monuments on there. I think there's pretty much, they're all over the place. They're on Mars. They're on Venus. They're on moons of various bodies as well. I think that they're literally all over the place. We've had this whole solar system populated by some spacefaring nation, and it may well have been us in a past time of technological ascendancy before we kind of wiped ourselves out. But then again, it may well be aliens that are part of the picture. Maybe even we're working with them at some level, and well, I'm sure we are at certain locations on the Earth. But
if that moon would turn out to be if our moon turned out to be artificial, then I would have to question many other moons within our solar system, especially the one
Phobos.
Yes.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say that one.
Yeah. So, that's interesting. I've heard about the whole ring like a bell thing, but I don't know. It's just hard for me to grasp that it's artificial. But then I guess if I look back at all the things we talk about here on this show, alien involvement and everything else, I guess it is possible. I'd love to see some proof.
I know. I think that's the thing about the moon. Some theories suggest it's like it was an outer skin of the Earth that was like sloughed off in a kind of a rapid spin motion. And in fact, this is one of the theories. This is what Walter Russell talks about. I mean, for example, like the rings of Saturn. What Russell says is that bodies like that, when they die, they expand centrifugally. And they go through these burst periods, like I was talking about earlier, about sudden disruptions, where mass is thrown off the equator in a rapid spinning motion, and it just ejects out to form these bands, right? It's like sloughed off the outer skin of a planet into the equatorial zone and thrown out to give us the rings, and that this is what periodically happens to planets. And the rings can then coalesce into moons if they then develop a deviation and an elliptical orbit inclined to the equator. You see, they remain circular debris because they're at the equator, but I think this is what he was saying about how moons form. So maybe that is the way in which our moon formed.
You know what we need to do? We need to get together a citizens funded type operation where we put together a very simple type of a rover of some sort, or a probe, or whatever the hell it is, and we need to just fund it by the people, open up a website, have it live right there, and send that sucker up there, and let's see what's really there. That's what we need to do.
I think, you say that, I think corporations out there, some of them have got the money to send their own probes up and whatever,
Yeah, but they're not going to tell us.
They hitch a ride on rockets, fired by like NASA and the European Space Agency and whatever, I think they do the Ariane one from French Guiana. I think that's right. They usually, but I'm sure if we were about to find anything like amazing, the little probe would be zapped in mid-flight.
Well, that would be a good indication for us, though, to know that we were on the right track at least. But I agree. I think that it would somehow be hit by something on its way there, but or we'd all disappear.
I think that's what happened to that Phobos probe, but was that the Soviet one, like 1989 or 80s sometime? The Phobos one, and it captured a few still images of some kind of rectangular object coming at it before they lost communication, and so they thought it had been taken out by some craft of some sort as it was approaching Phobos.
Yeah. Well, I don't doubt it. I think that's probably what happened to some of the gadgets that they were sending to Mars that disappeared. There's just things they're not supposed to see. So it's one of two things. Either people here in control on Earth are not wanting these things to be seen and stopping us, or there's somebody on the moon or on Mars and they're saying, oh, they're sending another one, shoot it down. I don't know. Interesting stuff, though. Let's talk about your book a little bit. Tell people where they can get it. And I know it's really late where you are, so I won't hold you too much longer. But I definitely want to get you back at some point and talk some more, because you're just fascinating information. You've done some really good research, and while I don't understand all the mathematics, I do understand what you're telling us, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, my book is called The Lost Age of High Knowledge, and you can get it from my website, which is occultphysics.com. I kind of chose occult physics. Occult, in the sense of it, just means hidden, but to a large part, a lot of what we talk about is a bit sinister as well. So I chose that term, and to imply also that well, combined with physics, we've got a physics to this. It is a true science. And it does discuss in my book the ordering of the solar system and how the mathematical laws I've described on your show, how I developed them, and the precision and elegance of the entire way in which they appear to validate how the solar system has been transformed in line from a harmonious state to its present one. But I also discuss, again, some of the in-depth secrets of the nuclear weapons and earthquake science that I was also discussing here. And I evaluate about 15 nuclear weapons and show you, again, the ratios and how elegant and precise they are, which do give you, if you will, this is how we back up astrology itself. Because when people talk about astrology, not so much the astrology about how the planets affect human mood, but how they trigger earthbound disasters like earthquakes. It really gives you the science of it. It is very real. Energetic relations between different celestial bodies triggering effects upon the Earth. So I get into the secret science of earthquake prediction and how that also ties in with nuclear weapons, very much related. And I discuss also the echelon matrix. You'll also find in my book work on such as Buckley Air Force Base linked into Pine Gap and Menwith Hill as well, and a few of the earthquakes that I evaluated, like the 2004 one on December the 26th that caused the tsunami. So I look at all those things, and I say my book is The Lost Age of High Knowledge, and you get it from my website, occultphysics.com. No space between them, just occult physics, all one word, essentially.
Great. I've got a couple more questions that just came to mind here that I want to ask you, and you could be as brief as you like, or you could take a few minutes on them.
Yeah, go for it.
All right. The moon, Mars, are they having quakes too? I can't call them earthquakes, but do they have that same type of seismic activity?
I believe, yes. I believe all the celestial bodies will have it. And interestingly enough, you see flashes sometimes on these various bodies. And I know I get into this in my book a bit more. This one of the things I did not mention here, maybe we didn't have time for it, was...
Oh, we've got another half hour, so if you want.
Well, I can go for another half hour, actually, if that's okay.
Great, let's do it.
No problem there. One of the things regarding that I didn't get into was how you can actually make use of these, if you will, conduits. You know how I talk about when certain celestial patterns are arranged naturally, earthquakes are caused by matter withdrawing from one location and in an ordered way emerging at another location on another celestial body. You could get this same mechanism, latch onto it, and use it for transportation and communication purposes. The very Stargate technology we hear about, of opening a portal, going through it, and emerging instantaneously at another body. This is the web that allows you to do this. And a couple of the things that I was looking at in this book was the Philadelphia experiment, which you may have heard of. There was a teleportation incident linked to that. And I was looking at this, again, this is from Bruce Cathie's work. He isolated the two coordinates he believed it took place on, and I just took his raw data and evaluated it in line with my own measurement systems, and I seem to find that the separation between is about 220 miles, but in feet it's basically 1,152,082 feet. Now, just the 82 aside, 1152. It's one of these basic numbers that ties in strongly to the basic 360-degree set, if you will. I mean, if you were to just take that number 1152 and divide it by 2 a few times, even get down to 144 and 72 and 36, it's part of that sequence, and it seemed to suggest to me that he may have got the coordinates right. But what I also found was this: there is an earthquake that took place, and this was a nuclear weapons test that took place, and this is in my book, The Lost Age of High Knowledge. It's called Canakin, this test. This is what I talk about. and it was one of the Aleutian Islands, and it was in 1971, November the 6th, yeah? And they had this test go off. It was a 5 megaton underground test, highest yield underground test. And a few days later, there was an earthquake there. You see, the primary explosion, 5 megatons, yeah, picked up an earthquake, registered at various databases as a 6.5 earthquake, yeah? But a few days later, you had a 4.9 at exactly the same coordinates. And one of the things that I talk about with respect to nuclear weapons is that they're not like ordinary weapons, and they cause a rupture in space-time. And the explosion that occurs, yes, I believe that not all of it occurs at the exact moment when you do the test. A fraction of it can actually either be transmitted to another location, right, and manifest as an earthquake, either at the exact same moment, or you can have some of the explosion, and this might sound a bit radical, transmitted into the future and manifest as an earthquake, either at a different location or at the same location. And I think that secondary earthquake, that 4.9, was not the result of just, random instability 2 days later that gave it. I think it was a fraction of the explosion transmitted into the future. And there's other people that have done work in this kind of area. And when you look at the whole issue of the way in which this physics works, I do believe we are talking about matter being transmitted between different locations on the same celestial body, or to different locations on other celestial bodies, yeah, or even transmitting it in space and time. It emerges and can manifest, say, a nuclear explosion, part of it can manifest as an earthquake somewhere else, or at another time, a different when.
So
and this is why when you were talking about the moon and that, we see flashes sometimes on the moon, and I wonder whether or not some of these, because they're reported, several hundred at a time here and there, and I almost wonder if these are something to do with something happening on the Earth and having a connection to the moon and transmitting energy there. It just occurred to me that this is one thing I theorized about a few years ago. But I do think that all the bodies are transmitting seismic activity because they're all exchanging mass in the way that I said. So some planets or some celestial bodies are going to have a net increase in mass, and others are going to have a decrease. But there'll be seismic activity on all the bodies, including the sun even.
That is fascinating. So then, in theory, then that these elites, I'll call them, if they wanted to, they can actually detonate a bomb and plan for it to cause an earthquake somewhere 2 days later.
Yeah, I believe so, yes, if they know what they're doing. And I'll even throw in another little tidbit of information to you. This is one of these things that I just saw it and I thought, I know what that means. Have you ever heard of a man called George Adamski?
No, I haven't.
No. He was from 1950s, a really kind of, one of the early UFO contactees. Met aliens, communicated to him, and he gave around lots of lectures. And, some people think he's totally legitimate, other people are just, but he wondered about it. But anyway, one of the things he's supposed to have said, and I think this is in 50s or 60s or whatever, really early on, he said that these aliens had told him that they didn't like us setting off these nuclear weapons because they could damage their worlds. Now, how could somebody setting off a nuclear bomb on Earth damage some other world? Well, if we're going to see that a lot of these are connected to the sun, and if we are effectively causing a disruption to the Earth, and part of that's transmitted to the sun, our sun, I believe, is in communication, if you will, with other stars. And part of that is, again, instantly transmitted to other stars, which can be then cascaded down towards other planets. The mechanism appears there, right? And it makes sense then, what he says, it could damage other planets. because the disruptions we cause to the Earth can be transmitted through this principle of least resistance in a quantum mechanics sense. A local withdrawal of matter here, local emergence somewhere else, even over vast distances, but in an ordered way. It was one of those things that I saw it and I thought, I get what that means. I understand what he's saying there, what these aliens are trying to say.
That is just amazing, and it makes sense. It makes sense, because we've seen a lot of UFO activity, and I've always thought that we pretty much called them. We detonated that first atomic bomb, and that was the wake up call. They said, "Oh, they're alive down there."
Yep, and I would say you've just hit the nail right on the head, because it's like broadcasting something, instantaneous broadcasting. The minute that device went off, throughout probably maybe the entire galaxy or beyond, anybody that's technologically capable of would have detected, no matter how great the distance was, that energetic signature, and they would have gone and they would have been able to investigate us. And this is why I think, well, it's on record that a lot of the alien activity that came straight in, in the early 40s, well, mid 40s to late 40s, they were all swarming around nuclear test sites. I believe, was it 509 Air Division? Is that the one that had the atomic bomb just after Hiroshima and Nagasaki?
I'm not positive of that, but...
Yeah, but again, they were all over them. They were all over these bases. You've even had them go to missile silos in the 60s and whatever, and somehow these craft over India have deactivated the entire silos. There's all kinds of things that they seem to be well aware of. There's even another story I read about where there was a missile test at I think it was at your White Sands missile range, and somebody videotaped it. You're able to videotaping your own missile in flight. And what they didn't notice about the missile, because the missile seemed to go fine, yes, it flew across to exactly where it was supposed to go, and they thought, oh, great stuff. And then they looked at the video. And when they looked at the video tracking this missile, they found a little flying object, if you will, fly right alongside the missile within a couple of feet from it, beaming little laser beams around where the missile warhead was, appearing not to damage it, but just doing that, flying alongside it and then just going away. And they didn't realize this until they looked at the video and they thought, how could somebody do that? They first thought, no way, Soviets could have done that. But for an object to be tracking the missile in flight like that, it's like totally making you aware, hey, we can take out your missiles anytime. Yeah.
Yeah, and it kind of makes me wonder, and here I go off with speculation, but maybe these ETs warned them, we better not see that signature again. And so maybe now, okay, well, we can't nuke Japan, so let's just knock out their nuclear power plant, and we'll hit them with the radiation or what have you, and we won't set off the explosion. It's just a thought.
That's almost the insanity, though, isn't it, of the so-called elite? Because, I mean, they're poisoning the entire planet that, they live on too. You got to think, where are the brains at,
Yeah, exactly. That's why, sometimes I wonder if there isn't some, other race of being from somewhere out in the galaxy here. I mean, who are they setting the planet up for? I mean, we're not going to be able to live on it at the rate they're going. So you got to wonder, who's behind it all.
Yeah, I would say at the highest level, it is extraterrestrials that are in communication with our government. In fact, they've never not been here. Do you know when Kenneth Arnold, 1947, made his big, discovery, and he announced, hey, I've seen what looked to be skipping flying saucers. I think, was it going over the Cascade Mountains? Oh, look, 7 or 8 of them, or whatever, yeah? You think about that. There are people who have dug up ancient records going back 2,000 years of the Roman army being tormented by flying shields, right? References, flying shields. And I think Alexander the Great's armies, when they were going near India, they were scared off by flying shields as well. And, we're not talking about somebody just throwing a shield like, you have a sword and a shield. We're talking about in the air, flying craft, and I think they've always been there. It's just that we've now got to this level of technology that there's a great interest in us.
Yeah. Probably the biggest interest is there's, we're probably like, I hate to say it, but something like roaches to them, and they're like, I hope they don't spread out into the galaxy. I mean, they're just so destructive.
Well, I think this is the thing about. When we look at our imperial history, if you want to put it that way, of conquest for resources and wherever it makes you think, well, if you've got aliens that are capable of, say, visiting the Earth from wherever, either other planets or interdimensionally, wherever, you got yourself, if they wanted to conquer us, what would they want to seize? What would their prize be?
And why would they wait so long to do it?
Well, I don't think that they'd be interested in necessarily the resources of the Earth as such. They'd be more interested in life forms, and this is what a lot of these abductions are about. They're probing humans. They're even using us for food. I definitely believe that is part of it. There's some very important accounts out there regarding that. They're experimenting on us. They're getting samples from us. I think we are the prize. What they can do with us. I think that is the solution. They're not so much interested in the mining stuff on the Earth. I don't believe in that. It's not minerals and stuff like that. It's more of a power game, which is what I suppose the people, the elite on Earth, are all too well involved with. It's the same game they play. It's interesting when you think about the whole abduction phenomenon, because you get the feeling that the aliens are kind of screwing us. In some of these deals that you hear about that were negotiated with treaties, you had agreements said, yes, you can abduct humans provided you return them safely, they have no memory of it, and you give us a list of who they are. And you get other accounts where after somebody's been abducted, various military, human personnel go to see them, demanding to know what the aliens were asking for, because they don't even trust the aliens.
Yeah,
and they're not
and here in the United States, I've seen where there's actually a law on the books that it's against the law for anybody to have contact with ET. So if, in other words, if an ET come knocking at my door, I'm supposed to call the government. I'm not supposed to talk with them. So why would a law like that be on the books? I mean, it's really there.
Is that one of these state law, or is that a federal law?
I believe it's a federal law that's on the books. So I'm telling you, there's a lot of evidence that points to it. I mean, people still want to walk around through life and say, no, we're the only ones, we're that special, that we're all there is. And I have news for people. I have a feeling the universe is teeming with life, and I don't know exactly what's going on as far as why they've been here or why they keep coming back, but I don't know. I think they have a lot to do with us and our existence, and I just, I'm not saying they're God, but I don't know. They've tampered here.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I definitely think that. I mean, this, I suppose, goes back even to such as the Bible, the whole idea that we have been manipulated in some way, we've been altered in some way, maybe in stages. I mean, just to look at the diversity of even humans, all the different categories of humans we've got all over the place, I mean, and why we all speak different languages as well. It's, these are all great mysteries, as to how these things got established. And I think that an extraterrestrial explanation is a part of the solution.
I think, and I look at it this way. I don't know how you look at it, but, I look at the human race. We've got good and bad. You've got, even in the animal kingdom, look at dogs. There's good and bad. There's dogs that'll lick you, dogs that'll bite you. And I think that it's like that throughout the universe. I think that there's, probably bad ETs and good ETs. And I know some people don't like to hear that, but I can't imagine that every ET out in the universe would want to do nothing but eat us.
Yeah, I definitely agree that there's good and bad in there. I think it's hard to know, because the odd thing about it, when we think about good people, even on Earth, good people are people that tend not to coerce you, not interfere with you, let you go your own way. There's almost a kind of dare I say, detachment, the old adage about for all that's required for evil to succeed is for good people to do nothing. Well, I think a lot of the good people out there do nothing, and I think that is what allows evil to flourish. Is because there's a certain desire to detach oneself from it, and this is why it's all too easy to think the evil aliens are going to get us. But you think to yourself, would good aliens come in to save us? And you think, they might not. Oddly enough, you do think to yourself, it's so easy to accept that the evil aliens are coming here to do us harm, but you think it's a lot more unlikely, that good aliens have come to save us. I think it's really up to us to do the saving.
Yeah, I think so. I think that if I've said this before, I'll say it again. Those who are waiting for the aliens or waiting for Jesus, I just ask them to think, think of yourself. Like when you're on the street, if you see a guy shooting a needle in his arm and he's asking you for money, I don't think you're going to give him any. But if you've got a guy who's just hungry and down on his luck, you're more apt to help that person. And I think that they're more apt to help those who help themselves. So if we sit here and do nothing, why should they lift a finger? I mean, why should I come out to defend you if you're going to welcome that evil into your home? I mean, you know what I mean? So I think that we've got to help ourselves. And then if that help is there and it's going to come, that's when it will come. We'll see. One more question for you. Everyone keeps asking about Planet X, so I'll ask you about that. What's your theory on that quickly?
I could have done quite a bit of a segment on that one.
Well, then we might have to have you back for that.
If people would have, if people want to go to one of my YouTube channels called Light Descent, that's all one word. I've got a major presentation. It's about 36 minutes, and it looks into, first of all, Zecharia Sitchin's theory, which I don't believe holds any water. But I go on to discuss also some of the science that we've got about Planet X. I mean, for people who believe in this, the whole brown dwarf star thing, I mean, that's not exactly Sitchin. Sitchin believes that it's a small body, a few Earth masses, maybe 4 Earth masses, 3,600-year orbit, closest approach, the asteroid belt. That's his standard scenario. That was based upon a mythological study of certain cuneiform tablets circa 1750 BC from ancient Mesopotamia, right? And he was looking at mythological stories from the Enuma Elish. It's just like the mythologies of, the Greek gods. A new god comes into the arena from the deep, right? Deep space. He's called Marduk, comes in, gravitationally attracted to the solar system. There's this other body called Tiamat, which is the celestial body between Mars and Jupiter, There's an immense battle between these two gods for supremacy, which Sitchin interprets to mean one celestial body crashes into another. Marduk then takes up his words, Station Nibiru, becomes locked into a 36,000-year orbit. Now the thing is, there's no orbital stability to what Sitchin says, because he says this occurred about 4.5 billion, 4.5 billion years ago, because this is Tiamat, part of it splits off to become the Earth, and this is how old the Earth is. I've even run model simulations regarding celestial bodies, and it's like with Hale-Bopp. Hale-Bopp? About 1994, I think, or 5.
Yeah.
Astronomers first detected it, worked out its orbit, right? Worked out it at a 4,200-year orbit. In other words, the last time it was here was 4,200 years ago. Comes into the solar system, interacts with the gravity fields of the other bodies, goes out. The astronomers look at it again. It now has a new orbit. It's 2,500 years. So now it'll come back in 2,500 years. Every time it comes in, it's modified. The model that Sitchin has no stability. It cannot exist, like he says, for like literally billions of years, right? If you want to look about celestial bodies that come into our solar system, I do think we are talking about cometary streams, you know, being caught in those. And there are a few I did a presentation on my YouTube channel regarding this point. You can go to 1345 AD, 530 AD, 3150 BC, 7640 BC, and 10,900 BC. And you can look at those dates in particular where we've had major events, either a bombardment by comets, which may well have been dragged into our vicinity by a special comet, but it doesn't need to be very big. Or we may have well had, like in 3150 BC, an isolated comet impact in the Mediterranean, which did a lot of damage there. We had, the Black Death in Europe and other places.
Oh, yeah.
Wiped out a third of Europe, 1345 AD, not so long ago. From Cathay to Persia, a great rain of fire was to be had throughout the heavens. And it dropped onto, all the land about. And there was an obnoxious fumes coming up. And anybody who breathed it in was dead within half a day. This is what they were actually saying. These are written chronicles of the time. So it wasn't that the bubonic plague was from rats. That was like a secondary event from the collapse of all the agriculture, the starvation, because we had some cometary debris. And it's the same thing occurred around about 4th or 5th century or 6th century, because this is why we had the Dark Ages again. There was the problems there. So I don't think we're looking at a planet X. I think we're looking at a comet X in terms of periodically disrupting things. And it's not always the same comet. There was the work by Victor Clube and Bill Napier. And what they actually found when they looked at various bodies within the solar system, some of the asteroid fields and wherever, and, comets like Comet Encke and a few others, they actually did some modelling of it, and they found that the disruptions to these could be explained by a recent entry of a comet into our solar system only about 20,000 years ago, right? And that's interesting because you could have one that has several passes, is disrupted each time, so its orbit changes slightly. So first orbital period might be, established as 5,000 years, next one might be 3,000 years, next one might be back to, 4,000 or somewhere near. It will be modified each time. And at least if you look at the geophysical record of some of these disruptions, it's not the same interval between them. So it's possible, maybe 10,900 BC and maybe 7640 BC, maybe the same objects were responsible for causing this kind of disruption, dragging other smaller bodies near to the Earth to cause a kind of shower, a meteor shower,
That, I could buy that completely. I've got so much I'd like to talk about on this topic alone. What I'd like to do in the very near future is set up a time with you, and I'll do it on your time so that you don't have to stay up so late in the morning. But I'd like to do a video with you, maybe a half-hour video, and just cover this topic of Comet X, we'll call it, and maybe have this conversation, because I think that would be great, and I know the listeners would like it. I'll get it up on the website.
I'd be quite happy to do that,
All right, great. So we'll set that up very soon. We're about out of time here. I want to thank you so much for spending this time with us tonight. We've not got a whole lot of calls, one, but I'll tell you, we've got a whole lot of listeners, and they've loved having you here tonight, just as I have. Thank you.
Okay. Right, thanks for having me.
All right.
she contacts to get out of this curse that Ree's put on her. She goes to the wisdom god Tota, and he goes to the moon god Chonsu, and they play a game of drafts, right, with the moon. And the moon, the stakes are that if the moon loses, it will lose some of its light. And the moon does in fact lose some of its light and becomes weakened in the sky and smaller. And it loses 1/72nd part. And as a result, this adds, by the moon shifting, becoming smaller in the sky, it loses its light and now becomes a mere reflector of light only. This story initially says that the moon is a brilliant emitter of light, but it now periodically has to go into hiding, and can only shine a bright full moon every once in a while, This is like the phases of the moon explained. Mm-hmm. But as a result of this effect on the moon, 5 extra days are added to the Earth year. So we have 365 days. And each of these new days is a new god born. And as a result, this deposes the Ra from his place. But as a story, though, you've got to ask yourself, is there a physical reality to this? And I looked at what we knew about celestial mechanics, and for most people out there who've looked at the basics of the solar system, they'll be familiar with a special law developed or discovered by Johannes Kepler. And this was he lived in the late 16th, early 17th century. And this law basically relates the time taken for a planet to orbit the sun to its distance from the sun. And this particular law basically relates a change to the orbital period to a change to the distance from the sun using a combination of powers. And I'll just give you a basic example for your listeners. Okay. Let's say you've got the planet Mars, right? Now, that's got about 687 days to orbit the sun, yeah? The Earth's about 365. So if you divide Mars by the Earth's orbital period, you'll get a value of 1.88 or so on your calculator, yeah? Well, if you look at the distance of Mars from the sun, and you divide that by the distance of the Earth, yeah, you get a ratio of 1.523. And what he found was that if you cube the ratio of change of the distance, that is, you just multiply it by itself, so 3 times. So it's 1.523 times 1.523 times 1.523, yeah? That there will equal the orbital period ratio squared, multiplied by itself twice. And you could do that, I realise it's a bit tricky relating that, to people over there,
especially to me, radio, because I'm mathematically prehistoric.
It's a bit of a subtle one, but it's just basically relating, you're connecting up a change to the time taken for a planet to go around the sun to a change to its mean upon what are currently today feet, like in Britain or in the United States, what is right now today regarded as a foot unit, yeah? 6,000 feet, yeah? That is the primary unit for what is a 1 minute of arc sweep on the equator of the Earth in its ideal sense. There was a great proof of that. You see, if you simply take the equatorial circumference of the Earth at present, right, and you express it in units of 6,000 feet, right, the value is about 21,914 such feet, yeah? If you simply just divide that by the ratio of change for the Earth's orbital period from 360 days to its present, 365.24218, right, if you take that ratio there, and it'll be 1.01456, yeah? If you divide the current circumference of the Earth by that, you get 21,600. It back transforms to these wonderful harmonious values. And the upshot of all this, and I hope to end the mathematics here, the upshot of all this is that I found that once I'd validated the ideal set, could demonstrate this, I then started to look at ancient megalithic monuments, and I looked at the placement of such structures as Stonehenge, the Great Pyramid, and even some of the other things like the Pyramid on Mars. And I found that you could absolutely validate the location of these because they were chosen to be placed where they were based upon special latitudes. And they wanted to attain certain ratios. And even the sizes of these structures were tied in to the size of the planets. They were a harmonious fit.
Well, now, if I could interrupt for just a second, you said the pyramids of Mars. So is that to say that you know that there are pyramids? I've seen pictures, and I believe there is. But
yeah, have you seen the five-sided one, the so-called D&M pyramid?
I have. I've got a good friend who studies this stuff on Mars, and he sends me fascinating pictures all the time of this stuff.
Well, I'll tell you what I'll do then. I'll tell you about the Great Pyramid on Earth, and then Stonehenge, and then I'll tell you how that ties into the Pyramid on Mars. And there's a connection here, which it's in my book, but I've very rarely said this on radio, but it's an amazing connection. And it's one of those things which really validates the location of it. The reason I was at least banging on earlier about how the Earth changed from 360 days to the present value, very accurately. I'll just give you the numeric sequence of that ratio, right? It's 1.01456 as the beginning, yes? That's what you get if you divide 365.24218 by 360. The ratio there. That ratio multiplied by 10 determined exactly the latitude that the Great Pyramid was on. All about the mythologies, and you realize that they're all coded stories for celestial events and major shifts in the planets in the solar system. And so I looked at things like this issue of did the Earth truly once have 360 days per year? Because currently it's about 365.24218, just a touch under 365 and a quarter. And there's this idea, did it really have 360 days? Did it really change to its present? Or is all of that just an approximation? And it feeds into the whole issue of sacred geometry. And I was really intrigued in trying to find out whether or not there was a true universal system of measure, of units of measure, and it tied into these ideal units that we hear about. And when I was looking at the Nexus magazine in particular, they sell lots of books there, and I was very intrigued by a particular researcher called Bruce Cathie, and he wrote several books, and he only died quite recently, I believe, and he's from New Zealand, and he was looking into the whole thing of angular measure, of degrees, minutes, and seconds of arc. And one of the really incredible things he found was in studying UFO reports, he found that when he plotted the sightings of them and their movements, they appeared to align in a kind of basic north, south, east, west grid matrix over the Earth. This was around the area of New Zealand, which seemed to be of splitting up into minute of arc angles. He found sections of 30 minute of arc angles, and they could be split up further into 7.5 intervals. And he was looking at the whole issue here of something real. In other words, rather than just simply think that these units are abstract angular measures, he's basically saying, hey, we can tie these into energetic intervals over the Earth, and that somehow the UFOs are using this, so it makes it all the more real. And it was going in this direction that I decided to do a major study of the Earth, the Moon, the Sun, to see if there was any truth to a once harmonious solar system. I mean, for example, the ancient Egyptians, they had a calendar of precisely 360 days per year, with a moon month of 30 days, right? And they added on 5 unlucky days, as they call it, onto the end, yes? And they had a mythological story to explain this. And I'll just relate the story, 'cause it's quite interesting.
Okay.
In brief, the solar deity, Ra, had heard this prophecy that the sky goddess, Nut, would give birth to some children, and that a child of Nut would depose him. So he cast a curse on Nut that she could not give birth on any day of the year. And there were 360 days per year, right? And so Nut has this lover called Geb, which is the earth. Nut's the sky, Geb's the earth. And Nut goes towards distance from the sun, yeah? The Earth's about 93 million miles from the sun, yeah? If you were to move the Earth to where Mars is, it would have to have the same distance from the sun as Mars does. So all I found was, in a nutshell, is that just as Kepler's law relates the orbital period of a planet to its distance from the sun, I found that there are other laws of exactly the same type which link the moon month, the size of the Earth, and so forth. I found that there were laws just like Kepler's, but using different combinations of powers. And without going too much into the mathematics, I'll actually give you an indication of the things I was looking at, just from a viewpoint. If you were to take the mean distance between the Earth and the moon, yeah, you'll find that that distance is almost dead on 60 times the radius of the Earth, but it's not quite. It's 60.29. If you were to look at just again a basic one, under the Egyptian calendar, they're exactly 12 months to 1 year, but currently they're about 12.36. If you look at the radius of the sun, and then again you look at how many times that fits into the distance between the Earth and the sun, it's not quite 216. And do you remember we start out with degrees, minutes, and seconds of arc. Degrees is 360. Then we multiply that by 60, 21,600. Yeah, begins 216. Multiply that by 60 for seconds of arc, yeah? So you go from degrees, minutes, and seconds, and it's 1,296,000. All of these units, then, you'll find mathematically that there are relations between these, and our solar system seems to be tied into this primary set with variations. Everything is just slightly out of harmony, though. And using these laws, I was able to demonstrate how you could very, very precisely back transform the current solar system. I looked at all the planets, not just the sun and the moon. Well, I would say the sun, although that's not got an orbital period, I showed that its physical expansion is tied into these laws too. And I revealed that very decisively that there seems to be clear confirmation that our solar system as a whole was once in an amazing state of harmony, but that through some dynamic change to our solar system, and maybe even a universal level, right? All of the values have been transformed from this basic harmony to its more complex state. But what I ultimately took from this, where it got even more intriguing, was that I could demonstrate that our units of measures, the primary imperial measures we use, feet, inches, fathoms, I could demonstrate that these units of measure, there was an ideal set, and it is in fact based.
Psychology and sociology, who has delved into the mysteries surrounding the origins of sacred measures and the base 60 mathematical system of the ancient Sumerians and Babylonians. Keith has built upon and expanded the pioneering research of Bruce Cathie, examining the Earth energy grid matrix, and has made critical breakthroughs over the past decade in decoding the physics underlying not only the placement of ancient structures, such as the Great Pyramids and Stonehenge, but also modern military intelligent facilities. And we're going to talk more with him about this and so much more. There's so much information that he has that he's going to share with us tonight. So let me dial him up here and get him on the air with us. Keith. Hi.
Hello.
Hi, this is Michael Vera with Late Night in the Midlands. Welcome aboard.
It's good to be here.
It's great to have you here. It's what time is it where you are?
2:30 in the morning.
Oh, well, I thank you so much for staying up with us.
Well, I do have late nights usually, so well 5 in the morning I can just about manage.
Well, great. Well, it's a pleasure to have you here, my friend. I appreciate you taking the time out. I had a listener who contacted me and says that I needed to get you on the show. So I looked into you and I was fascinated, and I had to get you on the show. So you're here tonight. And I guess we could start out with what drove you down this highway of the ancient world mysteries and eventually leading up to your book.
Well, I would have to say it was something that came towards the end of finishing college, 1998. And I almost picked up a copy of Nexus magazine, which deals with all of these kinds of things. It's an Australian publication. And again, it deals with all of the topics, areas that you could say the conspiracy stuff, you know, the suppressed history, science, you know, religion, spirituality. And also, I got into this initially looking at ancient religions and even the Hiram Key by Christopher Knight and Robert Lomas and the whole Gnostic thread of history. But I was really intrigued by measure and angular measure, degrees, minutes, and seconds of arc. I mean, for example, you know, we have 360 degrees to a circle. And these ancient myths, because I've always been interested as well in Greek mythology, and I was a big fan of Clash of the Titans film as well, you know, Zeus and Hera and all of that. Sure. But I delved into this and looked at the works of like Ovid, a Roman poet, and his major work Metamorphoses, and it talks all